The blood on Rebecca Everett's hands was not her own. And she knew that when the marshal arrived in Salina, Kansas, he would not care that she had defended herself from a man 3 times her size, who had decided that a woman traveling alone was fair game. She scrubbed her palms raw in the creek water, watching the rust-colored stains dissolve into the current, her breath coming in sharp gasps that had nothing to do with the cold mountain air seeping down from the Rockies into these Kansas plains. It was September of 1876, and the world had taught Rebecca that mercy was a luxury reserved for those who could afford it. The wagon she had been traveling in sat abandoned 2 miles back, the oxen stolen, her meager possessions scattered across the trail like forgotten prayers. She had nothing now except the clothes on her back, a small knife tucked into her boot, and the knowledge that she was 3 days' walk from anywhere that might resemble civilization. The man who had attacked her lay face down in the dirt where she had left him, a rock beside his head, and Rebecca knew she could not go back. Not to explain, not to justify, not to plead her case to men who would see only a dead prospector and a woman with blood under her fingernails. So she walked north, into the wilderness that stretched beyond Salina's reach, into territory where the law grew thin and the land grew wild. Her boots were meant for city streets, not for the rocky terrain that climbed steadily upward as she left the prairie behind. Blisters formed and broke and formed again. Hunger gnawed at her stomach with sharp teeth. But Rebecca kept walking because stopping meant dying, and she had not survived 22 years in a world that wanted to break her just to lie down and surrender now. On the 3rd day, when her legs finally gave out and she collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine tree, Rebecca closed her eyes and thought about her mother's face. She thought about the little house in Ohio where she had grown up, before the fever took her parents, before she had been sent west to live with an uncle who drank more than he worked. She thought about all the choices that had led her to this moment, alone on a mountainside with nothing but regrets for company. That was when she heard the axe. The sound echoed through the forest, steady and rhythmic, metal biting into wood with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Rebecca forced her eyes open, forced her body to move, forced herself to stand even though every muscle screamed in protest. She stumbled toward the sound because it meant another human being, and right now that was either salvation or damnation, and she was too tired to care which. She found him in a clearing where the afternoon sun broke through the canopy in golden shafts. He stood beside a half-built cabin, his back to her, bringing the axe down in powerful arcs that split logs as cleanly as if they were made of butter. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, and even from a distance, Rebecca could see the way his muscles bunched and flexed beneath his buckskin shirt with each swing of the axe. She must have made some sound, some small betrayal of her presence, because he turned with a speed that should have been impossible for a man his size. The axe came up defensively, and Rebecca found herself staring into the most startling pair of green eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of new leaves in spring, bright and clear in a face tanned dark by vine and wind. A thick beard covered his jaw, and there was a scar that ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone, white against his skin. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Rebecca swayed on her feet, and she watched those green eyes take in every detail of her appearance. The torn dress, the matted hair, the hollow cheeks, the desperate exhaustion written into every line of her body. "Please," she managed to whisper, and then her legs gave out entirely. He caught her before she hit the ground, moving with impossible speed for someone so large. Rebecca felt herself lifted as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, cradled against a chest that felt as solid as the mountain itself. She tried to speak, to explain, to apologize. But darkness was already pulling her under. When she woke, she was lying on a bed of soft furs inside the half-built cabin. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, and the smell of cooking meat made her stomach twist with desperate hunger. She sat up too quickly, and the world spun, forcing her to grip the furs beneath her until the dizziness passed. Easy. The voice was deep, rough from disuse, and it came from the corner of the cabin where the mountain man sat on a simple wooden stool, stirring something in a pot hung over the fire. You have been out for near 12 hours. Your body needs time. Rebecca's hand instinctively went to her boot, searching for her knife. It was gone. She looked up sharply, fear sparking through the exhaustion. But the mountain man simply reached behind him and held up the small blade. "Figured you would want this back," he said. And he crossed the cabin in 3 long strides to hold it out to her. "Handle first. But you should know that if I meant you harm, there is nothing you could do to stop me. So maybe you can trust that I pulled you off death's doorstep for reasons that do not include hurting you." Rebecca took the knife with trembling fingers, studying his face for any sign of deception. She had learned to read men the hard way, learned to see the violence that lurked behind pleasant smiles and friendly words. But this man's face was like carved stone, revealing nothing except a certain wary caution, as if he was just as uncertain about her as she was about him. "Thank you," she said finally, tucking the knife back into her boot, "for helping me. I do not have any way to repay you." Did not ask for payment. He returned to the fire and ladled something that looked like stew into a wooden bowl. "You can eat first, talk later, if you want to talk at all. I do not require explanations." He handed her the bowl and a spoon carved from horn, and Rebecca's manners dissolved the moment the food touched her tongue. She ate like a starving animal, burning her mouth in her haste, and when she finally scraped the bottom of the bowl clean, she looked up to find him watching her with something that might have been concern. "There is more," he said, and he refilled her bowl without waiting for her to ask. The second helping went down slower, and as the desperate edge of hunger faded, Rebecca became aware of other things. The cabin was small but well made, the logs fitted together with obvious skill. Animal pelts hung from the walls, and in the corner she could see a collection of steel traps, carefully maintained. A rifle rested beside the door, and there were other tools she could not name. The equipment of a man who lived by hunting and trapping in these remote mountains. "What is your name?" she asked finally, setting the empty bowl aside. He hesitated, as if the question surprised him. "Ryder Sullivan," he said after a moment. "Most just call me Sullivan, if they call me anything at all. Not many people up this way. I am Rebecca Everett." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I suppose you want to know what I was doing half dead on your mountain?" "Not my mountain. Belongs to itself, far as I am concerned." Ryder leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms over that impossibly broad chest. "And I do not need to know anything you do not want to tell. But I will say that you look like someone running from something. And these mountains are a good place for that, if running is what you need to do." Rebecca felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear that had been choking her for days. "I killed a man," she said, and the words hung in the air between them like smoke. "He attacked me on the trail south of Salina. I did not mean to kill him, not mean to kill. I just wanted him to stop, but he hit his head when he fell and he did not get back up. I did not stay to find out if he was dead or just unconscious. I just ran." Ryder's expression did not change. He attack you the way men attack women, or was he after your money? Both, I think. Does it matter? Matters to whether you did something wrong or something necessary. Ryder's green eyes were steady on hers. Sounds to me like you did what you had to do to survive. That is not murder. That is just staying alive. The law might not see it that way. The law is 3 days' walk from here, through country that will kill you if you do not know what you are doing. And winter is coming fast to these mountains. You would not make it a week out there on your own. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. You can stay here until spring if you want. Help me finish building the cabin, help with the trapping and hunting. I can teach you how to survive up here. Come spring, you can decide what you want to do. Head west to California, maybe, or north to Montana. Start fresh somewhere the past cannot find you. Rebecca stared at him, searching for the catch, the price he would demand for his generosity. Why would you do that? You do not know me. I could be lying. I could be dangerous. You weigh maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, and you were more dead than alive when I found you. If you are dangerous, I will take my chances. A ghost of a smile touched his bearded face. And I know what it is to need a place to hide. These mountains gave that to me once. Seems only fair to pass that gift along. What are you hiding from? The smile faded. Nothing anymore. The war ended 11 years ago, and the men I fought beside are mostly dead or scattered. I came up here because I got tired of the noise and the crowds, and the way civilization makes people forget how to be human. But I stayed because I found something here I never had anywhere else. He looked around the cabin, and Rebecca saw genuine affection in his eyes. Peace, quiet, a place where a man can live by his own rules and not hurt anyone in the doing of it. Rebecca understood that more than she could say. The world below had been nothing but noise and violence, and the constant pressure to be something she was not. The idea of staying here, hidden away from all of that, was so tempting it made her chest ache. I would work hard, she said quietly. I would earn my keep. I am not asking for charity. Did not figure you were. Ryder stood, and Rebecca was once again struck by the sheer size of him. You can have the bed until I finish building the second room onto the cabin. I will sleep by the fire. In the morning, if you are feeling stronger, I will show you around. There is a lot to learn before the snow comes. He was as good as his word. Over the following days and weeks, as September gave way to October and the aspen trees turned gold against the evergreen pine, Ryder taught Rebecca how to survive in the wilderness. He showed her how to set traps for beaver and marten, how to read animal tracks in the soft earth, how to tell which plants were safe to eat and which would kill her. He taught her to shoot his rifle, standing behind her to adjust her grip and her stance, his hands gentle but firm on her shoulders. Rebecca learned that Ryder was a man of few words but deep patience. He never spoke just to fill the silence, and he never pushed her to share more than she was ready to give. But in the quiet moments between tasks, she found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. About her childhood in Ohio, about the uncle who had seen her as free labor rather than family, about the desperate decision to head west in search of something better. In return, Ryder shared small pieces of his own story. He had fought for the Union during the war, joining up when he was just 18 years old. He had seen things that still haunted his dreams, done things he could not forgive himself for. When the war ended, he had drifted west like so many other lost soldiers, working as a buffalo hunter and then a scout for the army. But the killing had followed him, and 5 years ago he had walked away from all of it, climbing into these mountains with nothing but a rifle and a determination to find peace or die trying. Found the peace, he said one evening as they sat by the fire, working to scrape clean a beaver pelt that would bring good money when he took his furs to trade in the spring. Took a while, but I found it. Turns out a man can outrun his demons if he runs far enough and does not look back. Rebecca thought about her own demons, about the dead man she had left on the trail, and the fear that still woke her in the night sometimes. "I hope you are right," she said softly. Ryder looked at her across the fire, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You will be all right, Rebecca," he said, and the way he said her name, slow and careful like something precious, made warmth bloom in her chest. "I will make sure of it." The cabin grew around them as the weeks passed. Ryder worked from dawn until dusk, cutting and hauling logs, notching them with his axe, fitting them together with the precision of a craftsman. Rebecca helped where she could, learning to chink the gaps between logs with mud and moss, learning to split shingles for the roof. Her hands grew calloused and strong, and the softness that had marked her as a city girl slowly gave way to lean muscle. She caught Ryder watching her sometimes, his green eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that should have frightened her, but somehow did not. There was nothing predatory in his gaze, nothing that made her skin crawl the way other men's attention had. Instead, there was something almost reverent about it, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time and liked what he found. One afternoon in late October, Rebecca was hauling water from the creek when she found the first carving. It was on an aspen tree near the water's edge, the white bark carefully peeled away to reveal the darker wood beneath. Her name was there, carved in neat letters. Rebecca. She stood staring at it for a long moment, her heart doing something strange and complicated in her chest. Then she walked back along the trail toward the cabin, and she found another carving on a pine tree beside the path. Rebecca. And another on a cottonwood near the clearing. Rebecca. By the time she reached the cabin, she had counted 7 trees, each one bearing her name like a claim or a prayer. Ryder was working on the roof, his shirt discarded in the afternoon warmth despite the chill in the air, and Rebecca stood in the clearing with a bucket of water in each hand and watched the play of muscles across his back as he hammered shingles into place. "Why did you carve my name on the trees?" she called up to him. Ryder went very still. Then he slowly climbed down the ladder and turned to face her, and Rebecca saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. He looked uncertain, almost vulnerable, and it was so at odds with his usual confidence that she did not know what to make of it. "Wanted to mark you as belonging here," he said finally, the words coming slow and careful. "This mountain, this place, it is the only home I have. And I wanted it to know that you belong here too, that you are not just passing through." He hesitated, then added quietly, "That you belong to me, if you will have it so." Rebecca set down the buckets because her hands were shaking. "Ryder, I know I am not much," he said quickly, the words tumbling out now as if a dam had broken. "I am just a mountain man living in a half-built cabin miles from anywhere. I do not have money or prospects or anything most women want. But I can keep you safe. I can keep you warm and fed and protected from anything that might try to hurt you. And I would be good to you, Rebecca. I swear on my life I would be good to you." She crossed the clearing in quick steps, and she had to tilt her head back to look up into his face because he towered over her even when she stood as tall as she could. "You think you are not much?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion she could not name. "Ryder, you are the first man who ever looked at me and saw a person instead of property. You are the first man who ever helped me without demanding payment. You took me in when I had nothing, when I was running scared from something I could not fight. And you asked for nothing in return. Rebecca, I am not finished. She reached up and laid her hand against his bearded cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch. You carved my name on your mountain, Ryder Sullivan. But you should know that you carved your heart into my soul the day you caught me when I fell. It has belonged there ever since, even though I was too afraid to admit it. For a moment, he simply stared at her, those green eyes wide with something that looked like wonder. Then he cupped her face in his massive hands, so gentle despite his size, and he lowered his head to kiss her. Rebecca had been kissed before. Quick, stolen kisses from boys who tasted like tobacco and bad decisions. But this was nothing like those clumsy encounters. Ryder kissed her like she was something precious, something worth savoring. His lips soft against hers despite the roughness of his beard. He kissed her like he had been starving for this, for her, and had finally been granted permission to feast. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder pressed his forehead to hers and let out a shaky laugh. Been wanting to do that for weeks, he admitted. But I did not want to push, did not want you to feel like you owed me anything. I do not feel obligated, Rebecca said firmly. I feel grateful, and I feel safe, and I feel like maybe, for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. That night, they sat by the fire longer than usual, Rebecca tucked against Ryder's side with his arm around her shoulders. They talked about the future, about what spring might bring, about whether Rebecca wanted to stay hidden in these mountains forever or eventually make peace with the world below. I think I want to stay, she said finally, watching the flames dance. At least for a while. At least until I figure out who I am when I am not running scared. Take all the time you need, Ryder said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I am not going anywhere. The first snow came in early November, big fat flakes that fell soft and silent from a gray sky. Rebecca woke to find the world transformed, everything draped in white and sparkling in the morning sun. Ryder was already up, feeding the fire, and when he saw her watching from the bed of furs, he smiled. Welcome to winter in the high country, he said. Hope you like being snowed in, because we will not be going far until spring. He was right. The snow kept coming, storm after storm piling up until the world outside the cabin became a white wilderness. But inside, life was warm and safe and surprisingly content. Ryder taught Rebecca how to tan hides properly, how to sew buckskin into clothing that would last through hard use. She taught him how to make bread from the precious stores of flour he kept in sealed barrels, and how to cook dishes her mother had taught her back in Ohio. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing the work and the space with a natural compatibility that surprised them both. Ryder proved to be unexpectedly tidy for a man who lived alone in the wilderness, and Rebecca found that she did not mind the close quarters as much as she had feared. There was something comforting about always being able to see him, about hearing the steady sound of his breathing as she fell asleep by the fire. The second room of the cabin was finished by mid-November, and Ryder built a second bed frame and filled it with fresh furs, but neither of them used it. Rebecca could not say exactly when she started sleeping in Ryder's arms instead of by the fire, but it happened gradually, naturally, as if they were both simply acknowledging what had been true from the beginning. They belonged together. The physical intimacy came just as naturally. One night in December, with a blizzard howling outside and the cabin wrapped in darkness except for the firelight, Rebecca kissed Ryder with clear intent and felt him respond with a hunger that matched her own. He undressed her slowly, reverently, his calloused hands gentle on her skin. And he made love to her with a patience and care that brought tears to her eyes. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the furs with the firelight painting shadows across the walls, Rebecca traced the old scars that marked Ryder's chest and shoulders. "Tell me about the war," she said softly. He was quiet for so long, she thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice rough with old pain. And he told her about battles whose names she recognized from newspapers she had read years ago. Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg. He told her about friends who had died in his arms, about the way war ground men down until they were nothing but ghosts wearing familiar faces. He told her about the moment he realized he would either leave the killing behind or let it consume him entirely. "I chose to leave," he said, his arms tightening around her. "Walked away from everything I knew and climbed into these mountains. Figured if I was going to die, I would rather do it clean and quick from cold or hunger than slow and bitter from all that poison inside me." "But you did not die," Rebecca said, pressing a kiss to his scarred shoulder. "No, I found a reason to live instead." He tilted her face up to his, green eyes serious in the firelight. "Found it again when I caught you in that clearing. You reminded me what I was living for, Rebecca. You reminded me that there is more to life than just surviving." Winter deepened around them, but inside the cabin, spring was blooming. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams the way some people learned languages. Ryder told her about the mountains, about secret valleys where wildflowers grew thick in summer and hidden hot springs that stayed warm even in the depths of winter. Rebecca told him about books she had read, stories she had loved, the education her mother had insisted she receive despite their poverty. "You are too smart to be stuck up here with a man like me," Ryder said one evening, but Rebecca silenced him with a kiss. "I am exactly smart enough to know that I have found something rare," she said firmly. "Do not insult my intelligence by suggesting I do not know my own mind." He laughed at that, a sound she was hearing more and more often, and pulled her into his lap. "Yes, madam," he said, nuzzling her neck. "I will not make that mistake again." Christmas came and went, marked by a feast of roasted venison and dried berry cakes that Rebecca made from supplies Ryder had stored away. They exchanged simple gifts: a new knife for Rebecca with a handle carved from elk antler, a pair of fur-lined gloves for Ryder that she had sewn in secret over many evenings. They made love slowly by the fire while snow fell soft outside, and Rebecca thought that she had never been happier. January brought the coldest weather, temperatures that dropped so low that the sap in the trees froze and made cracking sounds like rifle shots in the night. They stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only to check the trap lines that Ryder had set in a wide circle around their home. He taught Rebecca how to dispatch trapped animals quickly and humanely, how to reset the traps and cover her tracks. She learned fast, driven by a determination to be useful, to be worthy of the life he had given her. "You are already worthy," Ryder told her one night when she voiced these thoughts. "You do not have to earn your place here, Rebecca. You have it because I love you. That is reason enough." It was the first time he had said the words so plainly, and Rebecca felt them settle into her bones like warmth. "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared? Good scared. The kind that means I finally have something I'm afraid to lose." February came with a false thaw that melted the snow into slush and filled the air with the smell of wet earth. Ryder took advantage of the break in the weather to check his more distant trap lines, and Rebecca went with him, the two of them ranging far into the wilderness on snowshoes that kept them from sinking into the wet snow. They saw elk moving down from the highest peaks, and once they spotted a grizzly bear just emerging from hibernation, gaunt and dangerous as it searched for food. Ryder pulled Rebecca behind him instantly, putting his body between her and the bear. But the animal was more interested in finding carrion than picking a fight. It lumbered away into the forest, and Ryder did not relax until it was long out of sight. "That is why you do not go out alone up here," he said, his hand tight on her arm. "A bear that hungry will eat anything, including people." Rebecca nodded, her heart still pounding, and she pressed closer to him. She understood now what he had meant about the mountains being beautiful but dangerous. This place would kill her without a second thought if she made a mistake. And only Ryder's knowledge and strength stood between her and a dozen different ways to die. But she also understood that the danger was part of what made life here feel so real. Every day was a choice to keep living, to keep fighting, to keep building something worth protecting. And every night, when she lay in Ryder's arms and listened to the wind in the pines, she felt more alive than she ever had in the supposed safety of civilization. March brought more snow, one last blizzard that seemed determined to remind them winter was not done yet. They spent 3 days snowed in completely, the cabin buried under fresh drifts. And they passed the time making love and telling stories and planning what they would do when spring finally arrived. "I want to plant a garden," Rebecca said, lying on her back with her head on Ryder's stomach, watching the shadows on the ceiling. "Vegetables, maybe some herbs. We could have fresh food all summer instead of just dried stores and meat." "That would be good," Ryder agreed, running his fingers through her hair. It had grown longer over the winter, and she had stopped bothering to pin it up most days. "We could build a proper root cellar, too, store potatoes and carrots through the winter, make life a little easier." "I like our life," Rebecca said. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, maybe. I feel like I am finally doing something that matters." "You matter," Ryder said firmly. "More than gardens or root cellars or anything else. You know that, right?" She turned to look up at him, seeing the fierce sincerity in his green eyes. "I know," she said softly. "You have made sure I know. Every day, Ryder, you make sure I know." The snow finally began to melt in earnest in early April, revealing a world that had been hidden for months. The aspen trees put out new leaves, tender and green, and wildflowers began to push up through the wet earth. Ryder and Rebecca worked from dawn to dusk, preparing the ground for the garden, repairing winter damage to the cabin and outbuildings, checking the trap lines one last time before the season ended. It was on one of these expeditions, as they walked through a meadow filled with spring flowers, that Rebecca asked the question that had been growing in her mind for weeks. "What happens when you go to trade your furs? Will you take me with you, or should I stay here?" Ryder stopped walking and turned to face her. "I would take you with me," he said carefully. "But I need to know if that is what you want. There will be people in the trading posts, maybe even law from Salina or elsewhere. If someone recognizes you—" "I do not think anyone will," Rebecca interrupted. "I was just a girl passing through, and it has been 8 months. But even if they did, I do not think I would run anymore. I am not the same person who killed that man, Ryder. I am stronger now, braver. If I have to face consequences for what I did, then I will face them. But I will not hide from life anymore." Pride shone in Ryder's eyes. "You are the strongest person I know," he said, pulling her into his arms. "And yes, you will come with me. I am not leaving you behind. Never again." They made the trip to the trading post in late April. When the trails were dry enough for the horses, Ryder had kept pastured in a hidden valley through the winter. Rebecca had not realized he owned horses, but Ryder explained that he always kept at least 2 for emergencies and for the long trip down to civilization once a year. The trading post was in a town called Cedar Creek, Montana, a 2-day ride from Ryder's Mountain. It was a rough collection of buildings clustered around a crossroads, the kind of place where questions were considered rude and everyone minded their own business. Ryder traded his winter's worth of furs for supplies: flour, sugar, salt, coffee, ammunition, fabric for clothes, seeds for the garden, and a dozen other necessities they would need for the coming year. Rebecca stayed close to him the entire time, aware of the looks she was getting from the rough men who populated the trading post. But Ryder's presence was enough to keep anyone from approaching her, and the few men who seemed inclined to try took one look at his face and thought better of it. On their last night in Cedar Creek, they stayed in a rough boarding house that rented rooms by the hour or the night. The bed was lumpy and the walls were thin, but it was the first real bed Rebecca had slept in since the previous summer. She lay curled against Ryder's side, listening to the sounds of the town outside their window, and felt oddly disconnected from it all. "Strange, is it not?" she said softly. "Being around people again. I thought I would miss it, but mostly I just want to go home." "The cabin, you mean?" Ryder's voice was warm with pleasure. "You think of it as home now?" "Of course I do. It is where we built our life together. It is where I figured out who I am supposed to be." She pushed up on one elbow to look down at him in the moonlight, filtering through the thin curtains. "It is where I fell in love with you, Ryder Sullivan. Where else would I call home?" He pulled her down for a kiss that tasted like promises. "Then let us go home," he said. "I have had enough of civilization for 1 year." They rode out at dawn, and Rebecca did not look back. The summer that followed was the happiest time of Rebecca's life. The garden flourished under her careful tending, providing them with fresh vegetables to supplement the meat that Ryder hunted. They worked side by side every day, building and repairing and improving their small homestead. Ryder built a proper barn for the horses and a chicken coop for the hens they had brought back from Cedar Creek. Rebecca sewed curtains for the windows and braided rag rugs for the floor, making the cabin feel like a real home instead of just a shelter. They made love under the stars on warm summer nights, and they swam naked in the cold creek on hot afternoons. They talked about everything and nothing, and they learned that silence between them was just as comfortable as conversation. Rebecca had never imagined that life could be so simple, so uncomplicated, so purely good. It was in late July when she realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and her breasts were tender, and there was a strange fluttering sensation in her belly that she recognized from stories other women had told. She sat beside the creek for a long time that afternoon, her hand pressed to her stomach, trying to sort through the complicated swirl of emotions. Fear was there, certainly. She was miles from any doctor, any midwife, any woman who might help her when her time came. If something went wrong, she could die, and Ryder would be helpless to stop it. But stronger than the fear was a fierce, unexpected joy. She was carrying Ryder's child, a life they had created together in love and passion. She was going to be a mother, and Ryder was going to be a father. And their little family would grow beyond just the two of them. She told him that evening as they sat by the fire after supper. "Ryder, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the trap he was mending, concern flickering across his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. At least, I do not think anything is wrong." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant. I am going to have a baby. Your baby." For a moment, Ryder simply stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then he set aside the trap very carefully, crossed to where she sat, and dropped to his knees in front of her. He laid his big hands on her stomach, so gentle she barely felt the pressure, and looked up at her with wonder written clear across his features. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, suddenly uncertain. "I know we did not plan this. I know it makes things more complicated. Happy?" Ryder let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Rebecca, I am terrified and thrilled and so damned happy I can hardly breathe. A baby. Our baby." He pressed his forehead to her stomach, his shoulders shaking, and Rebecca realized he was crying. She had never seen him cry before, not even when he told her about the war. She ran her fingers through his long hair and let her own tears fall, and they stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other and the magnitude of what was coming. Ryder became impossibly more protective as Rebecca's pregnancy progressed. He would not let her lift anything heavy, would not let her work in the garden during the hottest part of the day, hovered over her constantly with a concern that was equal parts touching and infuriating. Rebecca bore it with as much patience as she could muster, understanding that his worry came from love, even when it drove her to distraction. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from climbing the ladder to check on the food stores in the loft. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years, Ryder. I will be fine. Most women do this with a doctor nearby," he countered. But he stepped back and let her climb the ladder, staying close enough to catch her if she fell. As summer gave way to autumn and then winter, Rebecca's belly swelled with their growing child. She felt the baby move for the first time in October, a flutter like butterfly wings against her ribs. And she grabbed Ryder's hand and pressed it to the spot until he felt it too. The look of awe on his face made her heart squeeze tight. They spent the long winter preparing for the birth. Ryder read every book on midwifery and childbirth that he had brought back from Cedar Creek, memorizing procedures and complications until he could recite them in his sleep. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric and fur, creating a collection of impossibly small gowns and blankets. They argued amiably about names, rejecting and reconsidering dozens of options. "What about Robert, if it is a boy?" Ryder suggested one evening. "After my father." "I like Robert," Rebecca agreed. "And if it is a girl, maybe Elizabeth, after my mother." "Elizabeth Sullivan." Ryder tested the sound of it. "I like that. But we could also keep your last name if you wanted. Elizabeth Everett, or Robert Everett." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "You would do that? Give our child my name instead of yours?" "Why not? We are not married legal. But that does not mean I care any less about you or this baby. And your name is part of who you are, part of what makes you Rebecca. I would be honored if our child carried it." He paused, then added, "Though, if you wanted to take my name, wanted us to be a family in that way too, I would like that just as much. Maybe more." "Are you asking me to marry you, Ryder Sullivan?" "I suppose I am. Not legal marry, since there is no preacher within 100 miles, and I do not have a ring to give you. But marry in the ways that matter. Stand before God and these mountains and pledge ourselves to each other until death parts us." He took her hands in his expression serious. "I love you, Rebecca Everett. I want to be your husband in every way that counts. Will you have me?" "Yes," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They spoke their vows to each other the next day at sunrise, standing in the clearing in front of the cabin with the first snow of winter falling soft around them. There was no preacher, no witnesses, except the mountains and the sky. But Rebecca felt the weight of the promises they made to each other settle into her soul like stones. She pledged to love him, to stand by him, to build a life with him for as long as she lived. And Ryder pledged the same to her, his voice rough with emotion, his green eyes bright with unshed tears. Afterwards, he produced a ring he had carved from a piece of elk antler, polished smooth and inscribed with both their names. It was the most beautiful thing Rebecca had ever seen, and she wore it with more pride than any gold band could have inspired. Winter settled in deep and cold, but inside the cabin, everything was warm and waiting. Rebecca grew larger and more uncomfortable, her back aching constantly, her sleep interrupted by the baby's movements and her need to relieve herself every few hours. But she had never felt more alive, more purposeful, more complete. The baby came in February, on a night when the wind howled like wolves and the snow fell so thick they could not see more than a few feet beyond the windows. Rebecca's labor started just after sunset, gentle contractions that she almost did not recognize at first. By midnight, they were coming hard and fast, and she was clinging to Ryder's hands and trying not to scream. Ryder was terrified. She could see it in his eyes. But his hands were steady as he helped her through each contraction, as he coached her breathing the way the books had said to do. He had boiled water and prepared clean cloth and laid out all the supplies they might need. And when the baby finally came, in the darkest hours before dawn, he was there to catch his son as he entered the world. Ryder Sullivan let out a lusty cry that filled the cabin, and Rebecca collapsed back against the furs, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Ryder cleaned the baby with shaking hands, wrapped him in soft cloth, and placed him in Rebecca's arms with a reverence usually reserved for sacred things. "He is perfect," Ryder whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Rebecca, he is perfect." He was perfect. 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes, a crown of dark hair, and eyes that looked up at Rebecca with unfocused wonder. She counted his fingers and toes 3 times just to be sure, then pulled him to her breast and felt him latch on with an instinct as old as time. Ryder sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Rebecca and one hand resting gently on his son's head. And Rebecca saw the exact moment when everything they had built together became real for him. This was his family. This was what he had carved her name into the trees for, what he had pledged his life to protect. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, of learning how to care for an infant in the isolation of the mountains. Robert was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he demanded constant attention. Ryder proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with his son when Rebecca needed to sleep, changing soiled cloths without complaint, singing old war songs in a surprisingly gentle voice until Robert's eyes drifted closed. Rebecca had known she loved Ryder before, but watching him with their son deepened that love into something she could not find words to describe. He was so patient, so tender, so completely devoted to making sure both she and Robert had everything they needed. He carved toys for the baby, even though Robert was too young to use them yet. And he talked to his son constantly, telling him stories about the mountains and the animals and the world they would explore together when he was older. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. And Robert grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, cheerful baby who laughed at everything and seemed determined to put every object he could reach into his mouth. Rebecca regained her strength and returned to work in the garden, though now she wore Robert in a sling against her chest, and Ryder never strayed far from them both. One afternoon in late summer, when Robert was 6 months old and Rebecca was working in the garden while the baby napped in the shade nearby, she looked up to see Ryder standing at the edge of the clearing. watching them both with an expression of such profound contentment that it made her breath catch. "What are you thinking about?" she called to him. He crossed the garden to her side, pulling her up from the dirt and into his arms. "I am thinking about how much has changed since I found you half dead in these mountains," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I am thinking about how empty my life was before you, how much it is overflowing now. I am thinking about how you carved my heart into your soul, Ryder Sullivan, and how I would not want it anywhere else." Rebecca wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face to his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and leather and the man she loved more than life itself. "I carved your name into my soul too," she whispered, "right next to where you carved mine. We are bound together, Ryder, for always." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the warm summer sun while their son slept peacefully nearby. And in that moment, Rebecca understood what she had found in these mountains. Not just safety, not just love, but a sense of belonging that went deeper than blood or law or any formal tie. She belonged here, with this man and this child and this life they had built from nothing but determination and hope. The years that followed were good ones. Robert grew into a sturdy little boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's quick mind. He learned to walk on the rough ground around the cabin, learned to talk in full sentences before he was 2 years old, learned to help with simple chores almost as soon as he could hold a bucket. Ryder taught him about the mountains with infinite patience, showing him animal tracks and edible plants and how to move quietly through the forest. Rebecca watched her son and husband together and felt her heart grow so full it sometimes hurt. Ryder was everything a father should be: patient, loving, firm when necessary, but never harsh. He had left his demons behind for good, she realized, buried them somewhere deep in these mountains where they could no longer reach him. When Robert was 3 years old, Rebecca found herself pregnant again. The pregnancy was easier this time, her body knowing what to expect. And in the spring of 1880, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, just as they had planned years before. Elizabeth came into the world with less drama than her brother, arriving on a beautiful April morning when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. Robert was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to help with everything and constantly asking when she would be big enough to play with him. Ryder was just as smitten, this massive mountain man reduced to helpless adoration by a baby girl who weighed less than 8 pounds. "I am going to spoil her rotten," he admitted to Rebecca one night as he rocked Elizabeth to sleep. "I know I should not, but I cannot help it. She is so small, so perfect. I want to give her everything." "We will spoil her together," Rebecca said, laughing. "But we will also teach her to be strong like her father, to be smart like her brother, to be brave like she will need to be to survive in this world." Life settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The cabin seemed smaller, but also more complete, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and crying and the 1,000 small noises that come with raising a family. Rebecca and Ryder worked as a team, trading off childcare duties and chores, stealing moments of intimacy whenever they could, and treasuring them all the more for their rarity. Robert and Elizabeth grew up wild and free, ranging through the mountains under their parents' watchful eyes, learning the lessons of the wilderness from the time they could walk. They were healthy, happy children, untouched by the diseases and dangers that plagued children in the cities below. They knew nothing of the world beyond their mountain except what their parents told them, and they seemed perfectly content with that. When Robert was 7 and Elizabeth was 4, Ryder made another trip to Cedar Creek for supplies, and this time he took the whole family with him. Rebecca had not been down the mountain in years, and she was curious to see what, if anything, had changed. Cedar Creek had grown slightly, a few more buildings scattered around the crossroads, but it was still the same rough frontier town. Rebecca walked through it with Elizabeth on her hip and Robert holding her hand, and she felt no connection to this place or any place like it. Her home was on the mountain, with Ryder, and that was all she needed. They stayed only one night this time, eager to return to their mountain. But before they left, Ryder made a point of asking the trading post owner if there had been any law asking questions about a woman from Kansas, any bounty notices or wanted posters. "Nothing like that," the man said, shaking his head. "Law does not much care what happens out here, long as it does not affect them direct." "Why? You worried about something?" "Just being cautious," Ryder said easily, and he steered Rebecca and the children back to their horses. That night, as they made camp on the trail home, Rebecca sat beside the fire with Ryder's arm around her and watched their children sleep in their bedrolls nearby. "Do you think they will ever come looking for me?" she asked quietly. "For what happened in Kansas?" "No," Ryder said with certainty. "It has been almost 10 years, Rebecca. If they were going to come, they would have come by now. You are safe. We all are." She believed him because she needed to, because the alternative was spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. And as they rode up into their mountain the next day, the world below falling away behind them, Rebecca felt the last of her old fear dissolve. That girl who had killed a man in self-defense and run into the wilderness to escape justice no longer existed. In her place was a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. A mountain man's wife, a mother, a survivor who had built something beautiful from the ashes of her past. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Robert grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap and navigate the mountains with skill that made Ryder proud. Elizabeth proved to be fearless and clever, climbing trees that made Rebecca's heart stop and asking questions about everything she encountered. When Robert was 12, Ryder began taking him on longer hunting trips, teaching him the skills he would need to survive on his own someday. Rebecca watched them go with a mixture of pride and anxiety, knowing her son needed to learn but hating to have him away from her watchful eye. "He will be fine," Ryder assured her, pulling her close. "He is my son. He knows these mountains almost as well as I do." They always came back safe, Robert growing more confident with each trip, his chest puffed with pride at the game he brought home. He was becoming a man, Rebecca realized, and it terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Elizabeth, meanwhile, showed no interest in traditional women's work. She wanted to hunt and trap like her father and brother, wanted to learn to shoot a rifle and track animals. Rebecca encouraged this, remembering her own determination to be useful, to be capable. Why should her daughter be any different? So Elizabeth learned to shoot, her aim growing steadier with each passing year. She learned to set traps and skin game and survive in the wilderness. But she also learned to sew and cook and tend a garden, because Rebecca insisted that being capable meant being able to do everything, not just the things society deemed appropriate for your gender. In the spring of 1890, when Robert was 14 and Elizabeth was 11, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant once more. The news surprised them all. She was 36 years old now, and she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but her body had other ideas. And after the initial shock wore off, Rebecca found herself pleased. One more child to love, one more piece of their family to make it complete. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, her body not as young or resilient as it had been. She tired easily and her back ached constantly. And there were days when she could barely get out of bed. Ryder hovered over her constantly, worry creasing his forehead. And Robert and Elizabeth took over most of her chores without being asked. The baby came in late November, during the first snowstorm of the season. It was a long, difficult labor that left Rebecca weak and trembling. But when it was over, she held a healthy baby boy with a shock of red gold hair that came from some distant ancestor neither she nor Ryder could name. "Samuel," Ryder said, looking down at his newest son with tired wonder. "Can we name him Samuel, after your father?" Rebecca had never told him her father's name was Samuel, but somehow Ryder had remembered from some long-ago conversation. "Yes," she whispered, exhausted but happy. "Samuel Sullivan. It is perfect." Samuel was a fussy baby, unlike his older siblings who had been easy. He cried at odd hours and refused to nurse properly and kept both parents awake for weeks on end. But he was also beautiful and sweet when he was content. And Robert and Elizabeth doted on him with an affection that made Rebecca's heart sing. "We are a proper family now," Elizabeth announced one evening, holding Samuel while Rebecca rested. "2 girls and 2 boys. That is perfect." "2 boys and 1 girl," Robert corrected, ruffling her hair. "You do not count as a girl, Lizzie. You are too wild." Elizabeth kicked him, but she was smiling. And Rebecca watched her children bicker fondly and felt a peace so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had carved Ryder's heart into her soul for. This family, this life, this sense of belonging that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Ryder came to sit beside her, Samuel now sleeping in his massive arms, and he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For staying. For building this life with me. For giving me a family I never thought I would have." His green eyes were bright with emotion. "I carved your name into every tree on this mountain, Rebecca. But that was not enough to show how much you mean to me. So I am saying it now, as plain as I can. You are everything. You and these children are everything I never knew I needed." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You carved your heart into my soul where it belonged," she whispered. "And I have kept it safe all these years, Ryder. I will keep it safe until the day I die." They sat like that as the snow fell outside and the fire crackled on the hearth, their family complete and safe and together. And Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that every choice she had made, every hardship she had endured, every moment of fear and doubt had been worth it to arrive at this moment. The years continued to flow like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Samuel grew from a fussy infant into a charming little boy who could talk his way out of trouble with a smile. Robert reached his full height at 16, nearly as tall as Ryder and almost as strong, ready to make his own way in the world. Elizabeth blossomed into a beautiful young woman who could outshoot most men and outthink even more. Rebecca and Ryder grew older too, though neither seemed to notice the passage of time as much as they might have in the world below. Ryder's hair gained streaks of silver at the temples, and Rebecca found laugh lines forming around her eyes. But they were still strong and healthy, still deeply in love, still building their life one day at a time. When Robert turned 18 in 1894, he announced his intention to head west to California, to see the ocean, maybe make his fortune in the gold fields that still drew young men seeking adventure. Rebecca's heart broke a little at the news, but she understood. Robert had her restless spirit, her need to see what lay beyond the horizon. "You will come back?" she asked, holding his hands in hers. "Of course I will come back," he said, pulling her into a hug. "This is home, Ma. This will always be home." But I need to see what else is out there, you know? I need to know if the world beyond our mountain is as big as you and Pa always said it was. They sent him off with supplies and money from the sale of furs and all the love they could pour into their goodbyes. Ryder walked him down to the trail that led away from their mountain, and when he came back hours later, his eyes were red. "He will be fine," Rebecca said, wrapping her arms around him. "He is your son. He knows how to survive." "I know, but that does not make it easier to watch him go." Robert wrote when he could, letters that arrived sporadically through the trading post in Cedar Creek, telling them about his adventures in California and Oregon and points beyond. He was working as a guide for hunting parties, using the skills Ryder had taught him to make a good living. He was happy, and that was enough for Rebecca. Elizabeth stayed on the mountain longer, not content to leave, until she had learned everything Ryder could teach her about trapping and hunting. She was 20 when a young trapper named Thomas Fletcher came through Cedar Creek and met her during one of the family's annual supply runs. He was a good man. Rebecca could see that immediately. Respectful and kind, and not the least bit intimidated by Elizabeth's independence. They courted over the course of a year, Thomas making the long trip up to the Sullivan homestead as often as weather permitted. And in the spring of 1899, Elizabeth married him in the clearing in front of the cabin, just as Rebecca and Ryder had married so many years before. "You are losing all your children," Rebecca said to Ryder that night, after Elizabeth and Thomas had left to build their own homestead a few valleys over. "Not losing, letting them grow." Ryder pulled her close, and Rebecca felt the strength that was still in his body, despite his 54 years. "Besides, we still have Samuel, and we have each other. That is more than enough." Samuel was 9 years old now, a bright, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his parents did. He showed no signs of wanting to leave. Content to learn everything Ryder could teach him and spend his days exploring the wilderness they called home. The new century arrived quietly on their mountain, marked only by the changing of a number on the calendar Rebecca kept in the cabin. The world below was transforming rapidly. She knew from the newspapers that occasionally made their way to Cedar Creek. But up here, life continued much as it always had. They lived by the rhythm of the seasons, by the needs of their animals and their garden, by the simple routines that had sustained them for more than 20 years. Rebecca was 46 years old now, her hair more silver than brown, her body marked by the years of hard work and childbearing. But she had never felt more beautiful than when she caught Ryder looking at her with the same hunger and love that had been in his eyes since the beginning. He still carved her name into trees occasionally, she had discovered, adding new declarations to the forest, as if the old ones were not enough. "Why do you keep doing that?" she asked him one day, running her fingers over her name carved into a young aspen. "Because I need the trees to remember," he said simply. "I need this whole mountain to know that you are mine and I am yours, that we belong here together. Because someday, long after we are gone, someone might find these trees and know that once, two people loved each other so much they carved that love into the living world." Rebecca kissed him then, deep and long, pouring 23 years of love into that kiss. And later, alone in their cabin with Samuel asleep in the loft, they made love with the same passion they had always had, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had from the very beginning. The years rolled on. Robert came home for visits occasionally, bringing stories of his adventures and, eventually, a wife he had met in Sacramento. Elizabeth gave them grandchildren, 2 boys who looked like miniature versions of Ryder and ran just as wild through the mountains. Samuel grew into a strong young man who seemed destined to stay on the mountain forever, content with the life his parents had built. Rebecca and Ryder grew old together their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They still worked side by side every day, still talked for hours by the fire every night, still held each other as they fell asleep and woke each morning grateful for another day together. On a summer evening in 1910, when Rebecca was 56 years old and Ryder was 65, they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the mountains they had claimed as their own. Samuel was down in Cedar Creek trading furs, and they had the place to themselves for the first time in months. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked, her hand clasped in Ryder's. "Coming up here, staying isolated from the world?" "Not once," Ryder said without hesitation. "Every single day up here has been better than any day I spent in the world below. I found peace here. I found you here. What could I possibly regret?" "I just wanted to make sure," Rebecca said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Because I do not regret it either. Not for a single moment. You saved my life that day you caught me in the clearing, Ryder. And then you gave me a life worth living." "You saved mine too," Ryder said, his voice rough. "I was just existing up here, surviving, until you came along. You gave me a reason to live, instead of just a reason not to die. You gave me love and family and purpose. You carved my heart into your soul, Rebecca, and you have kept it safe all these years. I could not ask for more than that." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called out its hunting song. The creek burbled over stones in its eternal journey downward. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying the scent of wildflowers and growing things. Rebecca thought about the girl she had been when she stumbled into this clearing, desperate and afraid, running from a past she could not change. That girl was gone, transformed by time and love and hard work into someone stronger, someone better, someone who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. She thought about all the names Ryder had carved into trees over the years, declarations of love written into the living wood. She thought about how she had carved his heart into her soul, keeping it safe and warm, treasuring it the way some people treasured gold or jewels. And she understood, finally, what it meant to belong somewhere completely, not just to live in a place, but to become part of it. To let it become part of you until there was no separation between the person and the place. She belonged to this mountain as surely as she belonged to Ryder, and the mountain belonged to her in return. "I love you," she said softly, the words inadequate but necessary. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if such things are possible." "I love you too," Ryder replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Forever, Rebecca. In this life and whatever comes after." They sat like that until the stars filled the sky and the moon rose full and bright over the mountains. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing but determination and love. And if the trees around them seemed to lean in closer, as if listening to their promises, well, that was only right. After all, those trees bore witness to their love, carried Rebecca's name carved into their bark, held the memory of every kiss and laugh and whispered endearment that had passed between them over the years. The mountain remembered, and it would go on remembering long after they were gone. Because some loves are too big to be contained in just two hearts. Some loves need to be carved into the world itself, written into trees and stones and the very air, so that they become part of the eternal landscape. Rebecca Sullivan had carved Ryder's heart into her soul where it belonged, and Ryder Sullivan had carved her name into every tree, claiming her for this place, for himself, for always. Together, they had built a love that would outlast them both, a love that would live on in their children and grandchildren, in the cabin they had built with their own hands, in the trees that bore her name, and the mountain that had given them both a home. And that, Rebecca thought as sleep began to claim her, Ryder's arms warm and strong around her, was the best kind of happily ever after anyone could ask for. Samuel took over the homestead as his parents aged, bringing his own wife to the mountain and eventually his own children. Robert returned permanently when he was 50, having seen enough of the world to know that nothing out there could compare to the peace of these mountains. Elizabeth's children and grandchildren became regular visitors, filling the clearing with noise and laughter that echoed the joy Rebecca and Ryder had known. Rebecca and Ryder lived to see their great-grandchildren, lived to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, lived to grow so old that they were considered legends by the people who knew their story. The mountain man who had carved a woman's name into every tree. The woman who had carved his heart into her soul and kept it safe for more than half a century. They died within hours of each other one spring morning in 1931, lying in the bed they had shared for so many years, their hands clasped together even in death. Samuel found them like that and wept. But he also smiled, because there was something peaceful about it, something right. They had lived together and loved together and left the world together, just as they should. They were buried side by side in the clearing in front of the cabin, under 2 tall pine trees. And if you visit that place today, if you walk through those mountains and look carefully at the older trees, you can still find them. Declarations of love carved into living wood, growing wider and more weathered with each passing year, but never quite disappearing. Rebecca, the trees say. Rebecca, Rebecca, Rebecca. And if you are very quiet, very still, you might hear the whisper of the wind through the pines, carrying the echo of a promise made long ago. I carved your heart into my soul where it belonged, and I will keep it safe forever. Because that is what love is in the end. Not just a feeling or a promise, but an action taken every day, a choice made over and over to carve another person into your very being, and let them carve you into theirs until you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. It is writing your love into the world in letters so large and permanent that time itself cannot erase them. And somewhere in those mountains, on a homestead that still stands after more than a century, the descendants of Rebecca Everett and Ryder Sullivan still live and love and carry on the legacy their ancestors began. They tend the garden Rebecca planted. They walk the trails Ryder blazed. They read the names carved into trees and remember the story of 2 people who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that would never die. That is the end of the story, but it is also the beginning, because love like that never really ends. It just transforms, evolving into new shapes and new stories, passed down through generations like a precious inheritance. And every time someone carves a name into a tree, or whispers "I love you" into the darkness, or chooses to stay when leaving would be easier, they are continuing the work that Rebecca and Ryder began so long ago. They are carving hearts into souls where they belong. They are writing love into the eternal landscape. They are proving that some promises are strong enough to outlast death itself. And that, more than anything, is what makes this a story worth telling and retelling until the mountains themselves crumble into dust and blow away on the wind.